She's too confused to manage her own money, my daughter said to the bank manager, her voice calm, practiced, almost gentle, as if she were explaining something obvious, something everyone in the room should already understand, and I stood there, silent, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the polished counter, the faint scent of disinfectant and paper filling the air, the soft hum of printers and quiet conversations wrapping around us like nothing unusual was happening, like this wasn't. The moment my own daughter tried to take control of everything I had left, and I didn't interrupt her, I didn't correct her, I didn't even look at her, I just watched the manager instead, a man in his 40s with a neat tie and careful eyes, the kind of man who believed in procedures and paperwork, the kind of man who wanted everything to make sense, and Emily, my Emily, slid a folder across the counter toward him with steady fingers, nails perfectly manicured, her posture confident, prepared. I have the documents right here, she added, offering a small, reassuring smile, the kind she used to give teachers when she was a child and wanted them to believe she had done nothing wrong. And I felt something shift quietly inside me, not shock, not even anger, just a slow, steady awareness settling into place, because this wasn't sudden, not really, it hadn't started today, it had started months ago, maybe longer, in small moments I had chosen to overlook, like when she began asking more questions about my accounts, about my bills, about whether I ever forgot to pay things on time, her tone always light, always concerned. I just want to help, Mom, she would say, and I had nodded, grateful, because that's what mothers do. We believe in the goodness of our children long after they've given us reasons not to, and now here we were, under bright fluorescent lights, with strangers watching quietly from behind their desks, as my daughter explained me away like I was a problem to be solved. She's been forgetting things lately, Emily continued, lowering her voice just enough to sound respectful, just enough to make it seem like she was protecting my dignity instead of dismantling it, and the manager glanced at me then, just briefly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, and I met his eyes without speaking, without smiling, without offering him anything at all, because I wanted to see what he would do, what he would believe, and Emily kept talking, filling the silence I left behind, building her case piece by piece, her words smooth, practiced, like she had rehearsed them in front of a mirror, and maybe she had stood somewhere, holding those same documents, imagining this exact moment, imagining me confused, quiet, compliant, and for a second, just a second, I wondered if that's what she truly saw. When she looked at me now, not her mother, not the woman who had raised her, but someone smaller, weaker, someone easy to move aside, and I let that thought sit there, heavy and still, as the manager opened the folder and began to read, his expression tightening just slightly as his eyes moved across the pages, and still, I said nothing. I didn't rush to defend myself, I didn't try to stop her, because sometimes the most important thing you can do is wait, is listen, is let someone show you exactly who they are when they think you're no longer paying attention, and Emily believed that. I could see it in the way she stood a little straighter, in the way her voice grew just a touch more confident, as if the silence between us belonged to her, as if she had already won, and I let her believe that, just for a little while longer. The manager did not speak right away, and that silence stretched just long enough for me to notice the way Emily shifted her weight from one foot to the other, just slightly, just enough to betray that even she was not entirely certain how this would unfold, and I kept my hands still against the counter, feeling the cool surface beneath my fingertips, grounding myself in something simple and real while the rest of the moment hung in careful suspension, and I watched the manager's eyes move across the pages she had handed him, line by line, his brow tightening just a fraction more with each second, and Emily leaned in just a little, as if proximity alone could guide his conclusion. Everything should be in order, she said softly, her voice carrying that same practiced calm, and I remembered that tone. I remembered it from years ago when she would stand in the kitchen at 16 explaining why she had come home past midnight, her words always smooth, always just convincing enough if you wanted to believe her, and for a long time I had wanted to believe her. I had chosen to believe her, because it was easier, because it kept things peaceful, and now I stood here realizing how many small moments had led to this one. How many quiet concessions had added up until she felt comfortable standing in front of a stranger and speaking about me as if I were no longer capable of speaking for myself, and the manager finally looked up again, this time a little more carefully, his eyes moving between Emily and me, measuring something he had not quite decided on yet. And I did not rush to fill the space. I did not defend myself. I simply met his gaze again, steady and unblinking, and I could see the hesitation there now, faint but real, like the first crack in something that had seemed solid only seconds before, and Emily noticed it too. I could tell by the way her voice shifted just slightly, just enough to press a little harder. I have been helping her manage things for a while now, she continued, adding another layer, another piece to the story she was building, and that was when I understood fully, not just what she was doing, but how long she had been preparing to do it, how carefully she had constructed this version of me, this version where I was forgetful, uncertain, dependent, and how easy it must have been for her to step into that role of control once she had convinced herself it was necessary. And I let that realization settle without reacting, because reacting too soon would have given her something to push against, something to reshape, and instead I stayed exactly where I was, quiet, still, letting the weight of the moment shift on its own, and the manager glanced back down at the documents again, this time slower, more deliberate, as if something did not quite align the way it should, and I saw it then, that subtle change, the moment when belief turns into doubt, and Emily kept talking, filling the air with explanations, with reasons, with concern carefully dressed as responsibility, but her words no longer carried the same certainty they had just moments before, and I realized that she had made one small mistake, not in what she said, but in assuming that I would interrupt her, that I would try to stop her before she had finished, because by staying silent, by letting her speak freely, she had revealed more than she intended, and I could feel the shift now, quiet but undeniable, as the control she thought she had began to slip, and I did not move, I did not speak, I simply waited, because this was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment where everything she had built would begin to unravel on its own. The manager closed the folder halfway, not completely, just enough to pause without committing, and that small hesitation told me more than anything he could have said out loud, and Emily saw it too. I could feel the shift beside me without even turning my head, the slight tightening in her posture, the way her confidence adjusted instead of disappeared, because she was not the kind of person who backed down easily. She adapted, she pressed forward. If you need anything else, I can provide additional documentation, she added, her tone still composed but carrying a trace of urgency now, a quiet push to regain control of the narrative, and I let her speak, I let her keep building, because every extra word gave the moment more weight, more detail, more space for something to go wrong, and the manager nodded slowly, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just buying himself time, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the papers as if he were deciding whether to turn another page or set them aside entirely, and I watched him carefully, not with impatience, not with expectation, just with a steady attention that did not waver, and I could see the questions forming behind his eyes. The kind that do not come from what is said but from what does not quite fit, and Emily shifted again, just slightly closer to him, her presence almost protective now, as if she needed to stay between me and the decision that was forming. And that was when I understood something else, something quieter but just as important. She was not only trying to convince him, she was trying to keep me out of the process entirely, to make sure that I remained exactly what she had described, passive, uncertain, incapable, and I remained exactly that on the surface, still and silent, offering nothing to contradict her version, and the manager finally spoke, his voice calm but more measured than before. Ma'am, can you confirm that you understand what is being requested here today? He asked, directing the question toward me for the first time, and Emily answered before I could even take a breath. She does, but she gets overwhelmed with details, she said quickly, her words sliding in front of mine like a barrier. And I felt the room tighten again, not with tension, but with clarity, because that was the moment everything became visible, not just to me, but to him, and I turned my head then, slowly, deliberately, and looked at Emily for the first time since we had walked in, really looked at her, at the familiar face that now carried something sharper underneath, something controlled and calculating, and for a brief second, her eyes met mine, and I saw it there, not guilt, not hesitation, but certainty. She believed she was right, she believed this was hers to take, and that certainty was what made her careless, what made her move just a little too fast, speak just a little too soon, and I turned back to the manager without reacting, without correcting her, because I did not need to, not yet, and the manager did not look away this time. He held my gaze, waiting, giving me the space she had tried to take, and the silence that followed was different now, no longer empty, no longer controlled by her voice, but balanced, open, waiting for something real to enter it, and I let that moment stretch just long enough to settle, just long enough for him to realize that I was not what she had described, and still, I did not rush, because timing mattered more than anything, and I had already decided exactly when I would speak. Yes, I said, and it was the first word I had spoken since we stepped into the bank, and it landed in the space between us with a quiet weight that made both of them pause, not because it was loud or forceful, but because it was clear, steady, and entirely my own, and the manager's expression shifted almost immediately, just a fraction, but enough to show that something had changed in his understanding, and Emily turned toward me quickly, her movement sharper than anything she had done so far, as if she had not expected me to speak at all, as if my silence had been part of her plan, something she could rely on, and I did not look at her this time. I kept my eyes on the manager, because he was the one making the decision, he was the one who needed to see me as I was, not as I had been described, and I continued, slowly, deliberately, choosing each word without rushing. I understand exactly what is being requested, I said, my voice even, measured, without hesitation, and the manager nodded slightly, encouraging, waiting, and beside me, I could feel Emily's attention shift again, not outward now, but inward, recalculating, adjusting to something she had not anticipated, and I let the silence settle again for just a moment before I spoke once more. But I have not authorized any changes to my account, I added, and this time the words did not just sit in the air. They redirected it, subtly but unmistakably, and the manager straightened just a little, his posture reflecting that shift, while Emily stepped in again, faster this time, her voice cutting through before the pause could fully take hold. Mom, we talked about this, she said, her tone soft but edged with urgency, as if trying to guide me back into the role she had already assigned, and I turned my head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her without fully engaging, and for a brief second I saw something flicker across her face, not confidence this time, but something tighter, something less certain, and I returned my attention to the manager, because that was where it mattered, and I noticed then how carefully he was watching now, not just listening, but observing, taking in the contrast between us, the difference between what had been said and what he was now hearing directly, and I did not rush to fill that contrast with explanations or arguments, I simply allowed it to exist, because sometimes the truth does not need to be explained, it only needs to be seen, and the manager glanced down again at the documents, but this time it was different, slower, more critical, as if he were no longer reading to confirm, but reading to question, and Emily spoke again, her voice slightly firmer now, trying to regain the ground she felt slipping. She forgets things like this all the time, she insisted, but the words did not land the same way they had before, not with me standing there, not with my voice already breaking through the version she had created, and I could feel the balance shifting more clearly now, the control she had built beginning to unravel not through confrontation, but through contradiction, quiet and undeniable, and I rested my hands lightly against the counter again, steady, composed, and waited, because I knew this was the moment where everything would begin to turn, not because I forced it, but because I had allowed it to reveal itself exactly as it was. The manager did not respond immediately, but this time the silence felt different, no longer uncertain, no longer passive, it felt deliberate, like he was choosing his next move with care, and he gently closed the folder and placed his hand over it, not pushing it back toward Emily, not accepting it either, just holding it there as if to pause everything that had been set in motion, and Emily noticed that, of course she did, her eyes flickering down to his hand for a brief second before lifting again, her smile returning but tighter now, more controlled. Is there a problem? She asked, her tone polite but edged with something sharper underneath, something that had not been there when we first walked in, and the manager finally spoke, his voice calm, professional, but no longer neutral. I just need to clarify a few things before we proceed, he said, and that word, proceed, hung in the air with a different weight now, no longer assumed, no longer inevitable, and I remained still, my posture unchanged, my expression steady, because this was the moment where patience mattered most, and Emily shifted slightly closer to the counter again, leaning in just enough to signal urgency without appearing aggressive. Everything you need is right there, she replied, gesturing lightly toward the folder, as if the answer had already been provided, as if the decision should already be made, and I watched the manager's eyes move back to me once more, not quickly, not casually, but with intention, as if he were recalibrating everything he had heard, and I met his gaze again without hesitation, without offering anything more than what I had already said, because I did not need to repeat myself. The truth does not change when it is questioned, it simply remains, and the manager nodded slightly, almost to himself, before speaking again. Ma'am, have you signed any recent authorization forms granting account access or control to your daughter? He asked, and Emily answered before I could, her voice sharper now, faster. Yes, she has. That is what these documents are for, she said, but the timing of it, the way she stepped in too quickly, too confidently, shifted something again, and I could see it in the manager's expression, that subtle tightening, that careful attention that now leaned more toward doubt than belief, and I allowed a small pause to form before I spoke, not rushing, not reacting to her interruption, but simply placing my words where they belonged. No, I said, my voice calm, steady, unmistakable, and this time the word did not just interrupt her, it contradicted her, cleanly and completely, and the manager looked down at the folder again, but now it was different, no longer reading for confirmation, but searching for inconsistency, and Emily let out a small breath, barely noticeable, but enough to reveal the pressure building beneath her composed exterior. Mom, you probably just do not remember, she said, softer now, almost coaxing, as if she were trying to guide me back into silence, back into the version of me she needed to exist, and I turned my head slightly toward her, not fully, just enough to acknowledge her presence, and for a moment we stood there in that shared space, the distance between us measured not in feet, but in understanding, and I realized then that she had already gone too far to step back, that whatever this was, it was not a misunderstanding, it was a decision she had made long before today, and I turned back to the manager without responding to her, because I did not need to argue with her, not here, not now, the truth was already doing that for me, and I could feel the balance of the room shifting more clearly than ever, no longer tilted in her favor, no longer controlled by her voice, but settling somewhere new, somewhere uncertain, where everything she had built was now being quietly questioned, piece by piece. And I stood there, just as I had from the beginning, silent, where it mattered, and speaking only when it counted. The manager did not look at Emily this time when she spoke, and that was the first clear sign that something had shifted beyond her control. Something quiet but decisive, and instead he opened the folder again, slower than before, more deliberate, as if he were no longer taking the documents at face value but examining them with a different kind of attention, and I watched the way his fingers moved across the pages, not just reading now, but checking, comparing, noticing the details that had been easy to overlook when he believed the story that came with them, and Emily remained still beside me, but I could feel the tension in her presence, the way her certainty had tightened into something more fragile, something that required effort to maintain. There must be some confusion, she said, her voice softer now, less certain, as if she were trying to adjust the situation instead of control it, and I did not respond to her, I did not even turn my head, because this was no longer about convincing her, it was about allowing the truth to unfold in front of someone who was finally paying attention, and the manager reached a page and paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he read a specific line again, and then once more, and I saw it. That moment when recognition replaces assumption, when something does not align the way it should, and he lifted his gaze slowly, not to Emily, but to me, and there was a different kind of question in his eyes now, not uncertainty, but confirmation. And I gave him nothing more than a steady look in return, because I did not need to explain what he was already beginning to see, and Emily shifted again, her composure cracking just enough to show through. Is there an issue with the paperwork? She asked, and this time her voice carried something else beneath it, something closer to urgency than confidence, and the manager closed the folder completely now, not halfway, not hesitantly, but with a quiet finality that changed the tone of the entire room, and he placed it gently on the counter, his hand resting over it once more, but this time not to pause, but to hold it in place, to separate it from her, from the story she had built around it, and when he spoke again, his voice was calm, but firm in a way it had not been before. These documents are incomplete, he said, each word measured, precise, and Emily blinked, just once, a small, involuntary reaction that broke through her controlled expression. "What do you mean?" she asked quickly, and he did not rush to answer. He simply turned the folder slightly, just enough for her to see the page he had been looking at, and tapped it lightly with his finger. "There is no verified authorization signature here," he explained, and the words settled into the space between us with a clarity that could not be redirected, and I felt the shift fully now. The moment where everything she had built stopped being a possibility and became a problem, and Emily's posture changed, not dramatically, but enough, her shoulders tightening, her stance adjusting as if she were preparing to recover ground that was already slipping away. "It must have been processed separately," she said, quickly, searching for something to stabilize the situation, but the manager did not respond immediately. He simply looked at her, then back at me, and then down at the folder again, and in that quiet sequence of movement, the truth settled into place without needing to be announced, and I remained exactly where I had been from the beginning, calm, still, not reacting to her words, not pushing the moment forward, because I understood now that it no longer needed help. It was already unfolding on its own, and all I had to do was stand there and let it finish.